Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, this is part number 2 in our rewatch series of the Georgia Bulldogs, so we can kind of get people up to speed and kind of get ourselves up to speed on who Georgia is and what they do. I noticed in the comments on the last one, which was Georgia-Oregon, that Georgia fans loved our analysis of the Bulldogs, which mostly because it was, wow, this team looks like they could beat, the 85 Bears and the 2012 or whatever year it was Patriots and the Superstars. Like, you could form a super team of all those teams, and Georgia would beat them by 4 touchdowns. Well, I don't know if Georgia fans are going to like this one as much because we're talking about the Missouri game. Ohio State fans, we are going to be telling you to climb down off the roof a fewer times in this one, so I guess that's good. So eventually we'll make everyone happy, and you're equally unhappy. However that works. Right.
No, yeah, it's equally unhappy. If everybody is mad at you, then you know you're doing your job correctly, and so that's always that's what we always strive for here at the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. Let's do our job correctly. Doesn't have to be good, doesn't have to be bad, just correctly. And so we are talking about Georgia's 26-22 come from behind win at Missouri from October
1st.
No, October 1st.
It was the same day as the Ohio State-Rutgers game. I remember listening to this one in the car on the way home from the Rutgers game.
Yeah, and this is one where Georgia had to score 14 in the fourth quarter to win. That's what I call that Stetson Bennett time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anybody else does that, but I do that. And so as we do in these rewatches, we just go back and forth with the 5 things that we each learned or caught our eye. Tom, I let you go first the last time, so if you don't mind, I will go first this time. And I was really impressed with I know we're supposed to be talking about Georgia. I was impressed with Missouri's defensive line, the defensive ends, getting into the backfield. And so when you are impressed by one side of the ball, it is then okay to judge the other side poorly. And the tackles for Georgia and the offensive line really got pushed around, and they had some issues with Missouri's defensive line getting into the backfield, pressuring Stetson Bennett. I don't even know how many times they sacked him, maybe just a couple, but he was pressured. There was 10 total tackles for loss in the game for Missouri, and that's not just defensive line, it's linebackers as well getting in there. 6 pass breakups. I thought the pressure that Missouri put in there for Stetson Bennett to make some throws that weren't great, but I was just really impressed with the Missouri defensive line getting in there, creating some havoc. The offensive line for Georgia looked a little bit shook at times, especially in the first 2 quarters, and then they started to pick it up. But when you see what Missouri's defensive line was able to do, I think you can project Ohio State's defensive line to be able to do something similar. The key is then to bring Stetson Bennett down once you get into the backfield, to bring whoever has the ball down and don't let them get out.
Yeah, and it was not just the defensive ends either, because this was about half of my notes was like I just kept writing, holy crap, the Missouri defensive line is whipping their butts. And, I looked at some of the interior rush that Missouri got at times and have Mike Hall's name written about 4 times. Is Mike Hall going to be healthy for this game? If Mike Hall is healthy for this game, can he be as disruptive as Missouri's defensive line is? Because I kept stopping the game to pull up CFBstats.com and check Missouri's team stats. And any way you want to slice and dice the run defense, any way you want to slice and dice the pass defense, Missouri is behind Ohio State. Not, a million miles behind, but, Ohio State will be 18th and Missouri will be 30th in some category or whatever. And it was you could go through yards per carry, yards per pass, QB rating, opposing QB rating, whatever you want to do. And it was, this is not a Missouri defensive line that did this to people all season. So I think, and we'll see, I have not done a super deep dive on, hey, this Georgia offensive lineman had a, sprained ankle, the way that we know that Matt Jones was banged up all year. Mm-hmm. And that's why Matt Jones looked bad at times this year. I have not done a super deep dive on Georgia to, figure that out to that granular detail. But yeah, it was jarring to see. And, I think that's going to go into my first one, which was, boy, we watched Stetson Bennett look like, Torchy the QB robot who's just there to light people on fire and in the Oregon game, and then to see him look rattled and be off, and guys are dropping passes. The first play of the game, Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint dropped a pass, and I have focus question mark in there because we have seen Ohio State go on the road against an inferior opponent and kind of fart around for a while. So I'm willing to excuse that to a certain degree. Ladd McConkey had a drop, and he had muffed a punt the week before against Kent State, and again, I had focus. By the way, Ladd McConkey, unrelated to former New York Giants wide receiver Phil McConkey. I looked that up just to make sure. No relation. If you don't remember Phil McConkey, he went to Navy and then was on the 1986 Super Bowl 21 winning Giants team, was like a special teamer and would wave a towel on the bench and was this fan favorite. I think he ran for Congress later, but unrelated to Ladd McConkey. So there you go. There's the answer to that question. But the Georgia offense just looked out of sync pretty much all night, right until the last couple drives. And then it was kind of like, oh crap. And then, they like procrastinated and, oh crap, we got to get a couple touchdowns. And then they got a couple touchdowns and it was fine. And, but if you can get pressure on Stetson Bennett and you can get them out of sync, that offense doesn't look like it did against Oregon. And, I would assume the answer against Ohio State is going to fall somewhere between how they looked in the first three quarters of this game and how they looked in the first three quarters of the Oregon game. But, like I said, after the Oregon rewatch, I think every Ohio State fan was thinking they were going to lose by 35. Now, I don't think Ohio State is going to win by 35, but you can see a path to Ohio State winning if Georgia plays anything like they did against Missouri.
I remember watching the end of this game live thinking, oh, wow, Missouri's actually going to do this. And they didn't quite do it, but they were making plays when they needed to make them plays all the way up until like almost the end. Stetson Bennett finishes 24 of 43 passing for 312 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. I don't really recall any passes that should have been intercepted, but he was a little wild, throwing some high passes to some receivers. At the half, he was 10 of 24 for 149 yards, to give you an idea of the inaccuracies. And then I think through three quarters, or right up until they were before their two touchdown drives, he was still 17 of 35 for 234 yards and 5 rushes for -2 yards with the 2 sacks in there. And it's very easy to watch what Missouri did and say Ohio State can do that same thing. The difficulty is, will Stetson Bennett be as inaccurate? And was he as inaccurate because of the pressure? And because against Oregon, and I remember, we talked about this against Oregon, he had one where he looked one way and he was throwing the other way before he was hardly even looking there. And he was just on point with everything. There was none of that in this one. The timing was off. Throws were high. The pressure really, I think, was the issue. And I think that is something that could be repeatable for the Buckeyes. Which,
one thing real quick, just to touch on this, because it's not necessarily a whole separate thing, but you look at which game is Ohio State more likely to get. Are they more likely to get Oregon, Georgia, or are they more likely to get Missouri, Georgia? And this was a road game in the middle of the season with some guys banged up, and you're playing a team that you're expected to beat by 3-4 touchdowns. The other game was a neutral site game at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium against a top 10-ish opponent, where Georgia had a month plus to prepare. So, I mean, you can draw your own conclusions on which type of Georgia you are more likely to see. I think the answer is going to fall somewhere in the middle, but I would not look at this game and say, aha, that's what Ohio State's going to get, and therefore Ohio State's going to win. I don't think it's quite that straightforward.
Yeah, I think when Georgia's gearing up for an opponent, they know how to gear up. I think one of the issues, and goes to my next one, one of the issues for Stetson Bennett is his receivers were not getting that open. Wide receivers particularly don't have, there's not a big window for him to throw into for a lot of these guys, because as I said, Missouri had 6 pass breakups. Their defensive backs were right there knocking stuff down. And, not a great sign for the receivers. I understand they're healthier now than they were at this point, which is fine. But in this one, I think there's, Tom, I don't want to say the corners for Ohio State should be confident, because, they are confident, but don't get cocky. Don't think that this is going to be easy because this is a group of corners who have given up big plays game after game this season. And so even if these guys struggled against Missouri, that doesn't mean they're going to struggle against Ohio State, especially on the scramble drills and things like that. But I just thought one of my notes there was just how unopen the receivers were getting at times in this game.
Yeah, and not open, and then also not catching passes at all times. Like I mentioned, Marcus Rosemary-Jack Saint dropping a pass on the first play of the game, and it was not in the perfect spot. It was a little behind him, but it's one that it's in your catch radius. That's one you would sort of expect a guy to catch, and it was just like everyone was sort of a little off in that game, and yeah, this is, I'm a little concerned to say any of these words out loud after we talked about how Michigan had a lack of downfield passing all, for the full week leading up to that game, and then all of a sudden Michigan figured out how to pass downfield. But, Ohio State, if you have guys close, I think Ohio State has the opportunity to have guys in somewhat close coverage and try and turn more, some of those into 50-50 balls, and you're going to lose some 50-50 balls, but if it's a tight window, that is a much tougher throw for any quarterback, whether it's J.J. McCarthy or C.J. Stroud or Stetson Bennett or Bryce Young or anyone else. So that's, that will certainly be, not having like incredible massive busts on the back end of the defense would go a long way for Ohio State in this game. My next one, going side to side against Georgia still doesn't work. There was a lot of changes from week one to this one, and that one did not change. You should still consider not going side to side against Georgia because they are very fast and they're pretty well coached, and they don't seem to run themselves out of plays all that often. So that is still a very bad idea. There was a play very late in the game, and I'm trying to find my note on where it was. There was one where it was after there was a fumble on an exchange, and Missouri got the ball up 10-0 at the Georgia 36. They picked up a first down. Jalen Carter's just gone down with an ankle injury. They've got 1st and 10 at the 25, a chance to maybe turn it into a 17-0 game in the first half. And then they ran a reverse on 1st and 10 at the 25 and just got completely blown up. I think they lost 12 yards or something on it. And it was just like, you don't have to be cute. Just run north-south, throw the ball. Don't go side to side. You're not going to get them out of position. Stop it. Run the ball north-south against them. And if you want to go east-west, run a quick little jet sweep kind of thing. Like, that's fine. Don't do a slow developing. Like, no, stop it. Don't do that.
The flea flicker, reverse flea flicker back to the screen out to the left side. Don't do that. You
don't get points for degree of difficulty. It's not figure skating. Stop it.
I wrote down at one point the play-by-play or the color guy said, Mizzou wants to play this on the edges. And then I also wrote down, and Georgia linebacker Jamon Dumas-Johnson is like, okay, that's
cool.
fine. We'll play on the edges. That's fantastic. And they would, and they'd meet him 3 yards in the backfield. And and to the boundary to the edge, like whatever. I guess at least with the boundary, there's less. It's a quicker to the edge type of thing. So maybe you've got it's less of a run to lose some yards. But man, okay. If you want to do that, go ahead and see if that works. I understand that's what your game is, but. Yeah, you mentioned a good one there when they had the opportunity to take advantage and they didn't, and every little misstep or loss of yards is a disaster. Which, Tom, then takes me into my next one, which is this is again more of a Missouri thing, but also an Ohio State thing. Tom, did you notice the 2 times Missouri had false starts on the tempo, going up tempo, and they would immediately have an offensive lineman with a false start? And boy, we've seen that from Ohio State a lot this year. And if you could just hold your water on tempo, you can be successful. But what you can't do is screw up on tempo when things are going well, and then you screw up and boom, you have not only have you lost 5 yards, you completely ruined the flow of anything. And now you're like at 1st and 15, or, maybe you were 2nd and 2, now you're 2nd and 7, and you're back behind the chains again. And Georgia takes advantage of your mistakes, and you can't afford to make mistakes against a defense this good. And if Ohio State's going to do what Missouri did, they're going to end up kicking, 5 field goals as well.
Yeah, and this is, I think this is going to be something that, Ryan Day has talked about the fact that he knows they need to score 40 points to win this game. So I guess we'll find out if Ryan Day means it and if Ryan Day is going to stop kicking field goals in big moments, because Ryan Day seems to love kicking field goals in big moments. But, you look at, I think maybe the biggest moment of the game was Missouri's up 13-3, 5 minutes before halftime. They get a 62-yard run down to the 1. The guy gets caught from behind at the 1 yard line, so it's first and goal at the 1. False start. They run for nothing. They run a toss play for nothing, and then just a terrible throw into the end zone. No chance. There was never a chance that any of those plays were getting in. They settle for another field goal, and instead of 20-3, it's 16-3, and they just keep kicking field goals. And it's my dude, you gotta take some. You've got to just at some point just go, look. We have hit our quota for field goals. We cannot kick any more field goals. Field goals are not helping us. You are not going to field goal your way to a win over Georgia. It is not going to happen. Stop it. So, and that, again, that was a false start that just snowballed that whole thing. Because if it's 4 plays from the 1, they're probably scoring one way or the other. 4 plays from the 6, maybe not. But they and I think that was 2 straight runs into the boundary to start that too. Just you do something else, spread them out, run up the middle. Whatever. But it just, that whole thing, as soon as they had that false start, the whole thing was just completely discombobulated, and they never really threatened to get in the end zone. And I guess, I think there's a couple lessons in there for Ohio State, which is penalties, 2 is field goals, but 3 is Missouri did not play. This was not the greatest game in the history of Missouri football, and they still were in a position to win the game very, very late.
Yeah, I don't think I have an issue with the field goals in the second half for Missouri, because one of them, they're both over 50 yards, and I think the second one put them up 10 in the fourth quarter. So it's you really can't fault that. But I think one of the dangers of having a kicker with a big leg is you rely on them, and you can over-rely on them. And if you have a kicker with a short leg, you might go for it on 4th and 7 from the 38 instead of kicking a field goal. And you never know what might happen, Tom, if you get that first down and you get into the red zone.
I know what might happen, and that's score a touchdown. And Tony, as math indicates, scoring a touchdown is better than kicking 2 field goals because you get the PAT as well. So that is a thing you should consider.
Let's see. Let's go. I did like the Georgia fake field goal. While we're talking about the field goals, with Stetson Bennett is the holder, and he runs a fake field goal. And do you need to go special teams there instead of just going for it on 4th down? I don't know. I just like the aggression that they showed, the lack of fear. It's on the road. It's a play that's not, it's not necessarily going to hit all the time, but it hit this time. And I just showed field goals are fine, but we don't want field goals. And I like the aggression there from Kirby Smart to go for it in that fashion. Did they, like I said, would it have been better for the offense to be out there? I don't know. The offense wasn't all that great today. When we watched this today, the offense was not all that great, but in that game, they weren't all that great. And so you get it any way you can. You catch somebody off guard, and better to, I guess, run that off tackle play against the special teams defensive line than the Missouri defensive line.
Well, it's funny because the first game we watched was Oregon, and they didn't kick any field goals. They just scored touchdown. So they don't spend a lot of time, showing the setup for the extra point. So I just hadn't paid attention to who George Holder was. And that was the first time I think they showed him as hey, here's the guy who's holding. And I'm writing down, Stetson Bennett is the holder. Ohio State will have to be careful to watch for a fake. And then as I'm writing this, the announcer goes, it's a fake. And I look up and I was well, look at that. I'm smart 2 months after it happened. And that does feel like something that you're going to have to, I don't think Ryan Day is the only person who recognizes that this is a game you're going to win with touchdowns. So you need to you probably just need to almost play field goal safe on every single field goal, because this is the game where field goals are not going to win you the game. So unless you're lining up for a game-winning field goal with 2 seconds left, I don't think this is a game where you're going to, I think this is a game where you have to treat every kick like that as a potential fake. So yeah, I think that's, and having your quarterback, that used to be the thing. You'd have your backup quarterback as the holder. Now it's always the punter, and that's a practice thing that, the punters, have time during practice to do all the holding. Having your quarterback as a holder, that's something that really, sets you up much better for a trick play than a punter, because, we have seen Jesse Mirko run, and Jesse Mirko can pick it up with his legs. If it was Kyle McCord who was Ohio State's holder as opposed to Jesse Mirko, boy, you set yourself up for a throw downfield potentially a little better. But that is something that has fallen way out of favor for, mostly for practice time kind of reasons. Well, that was going to be my next one, so let's see. What else do we have? Missouri's touchdown in the first half on a fake wide receiver screen where a guy does like a block and go, and it was a tight end who was just wide open for a touchdown. What was funny to me was that was a great play call. It really worked, and it was essentially the same play that Oregon ran where Bo Nix got a pass picked off when he threw it to Christopher, the safety, Christopher Smith, the safety, in the first half of that season opening game, where same basic thing. You've got the kind of fake bubble screen, and then throw to one of the guys who's acting like he's going to be blocking. And it really worked in one case, and it really didn't work in another case.
Yeah, and I wrote down here that defense will bite with their eyes, basically, and that was one of those, because it was not a huge fake. It was just a little shoulder, and you see some guys get caught looking. Let's see. Here's something that Missouri did that Ohio State should try to do for my last one, Tom. Force fumbles, and really the Kendall Milton runs for like 35 yards. They come up behind him and strip the ball. That didn't look like it was very difficult at all to knock that ball out of there. I'm sure Kendall Milton has learned his lesson. I don't know. Maybe he's fumbled more, and we'll see it more in the next couple of games that we watch. The other one was just a simple dropped mesh point between Bennett and the running back. And so Missouri had the benefit of those two turnovers. I don't even know if they did anything with them, but you take the ball away from Georgia's offense, and obviously that helps, especially the one where Kendall Milton almost looked like he was going to go. But if you can, here's a lesson for you. If you can win a turnover battle, that's going to help your chances. But I just think I was surprised at a couple of those turnovers, which again goes back to your focus question, because those were two focus issues to me.
Yeah, and I went back and looked it up, and Georgia has fumbled 16 times and lost 10. They've only forced 12 fumbles and recovered 6. And generally, you're going to be about 50-50 on recovering fumbles. And so they've had a little bit of bad fumble luck in terms of theirs, and they've been about what you'd expect on defense. So, putting the ball on the ground 16 times, that's a lot. You do not want to have more than one fumble a game. And if Ohio State gets a turnover on one of those, or gets 2 turnovers there, then that's, potentially a very big thing in a game that's projected to be about a 7-point game. So, that was pretty significant. My last one, you look at Missouri throwing a pass way downfield to Mookie Cooper against Keely Ringo for a real big gain. And then, the next drive, Keely Ringo gets called for pass interference on the next time. And it was just kind of like, I've seen this before. I've seen Ohio State's corners do this before. And, Keely Ringo is one of the best prospects in the nation. It feels like, he's I think a first round pick, probably. I have not looked at NFL draft projections, but they talked about him as a, top 15 prospect in the opening game broadcast. So, this is someone who's projected as like an elite tier corner. You can still get those guys sometimes. And if you have a one-on-one shot downfield, you have to take the shot. You can't play it safe all the time. You can't check down all the time. You can't constantly, it's part of the run game. You got to go, throw the ball downfield. You have to throw the ball downfield. That's when good things happen. Sometimes guys catch passes. Sometimes you get called for pass interference and you get 15 yards. Sometimes you're going to throw an interception. That is the thing that happens. But if it is, it's like a punt. So, okay, that's not the end of the world. That is something that Ohio State is going to have to be willing to do. They have not thrown the ball downfield. They've been very conservative with that. And it's like if it's not really open, they don't want to throw it generally. So they're going to need to take some shots downfield against Georgia, because it feels, Georgia's defense, it's not like Georgia's defense is terrible against downfield passing, but it's a spot where you can potentially hit a play from time to time That's something that Ohio State's really going to have to do. And, Mookie Cooper is a receiver who was not good enough to play at Ohio State, and he's making a play there. You should have better wide receivers than Mookie Cooper if Mookie Cooper was not good enough to play at Ohio State. So, okay, let's see it. Let's see what that looks like.
Yeah, we saw against Oregon, Malachi Starks, Oregon, like right away, early in that game, Oregon throws deep, Bo Nix throws deep, and I believe it was Malachi Starks comes down with the interception, one-on-one coverage on a 50-50 ball. You see in this one, Kamari Lassiter getting picked on a little bit and Keely Ringo getting picked on a bit. I've been told that Ringo gets picked on more and more throughout the season. So this is like not a spoiler or anything. It's just like when you show previews of the rest of the season, you'll see, oh, somebody's in danger. I think Keely Ringo might be like one of those, oh no, what's going to happen to him? He's in danger as we go through this season of Georgia football. But yeah, if you have Marvin Harrison, and this is what we were talking about before the show, if you have Darnell Washington and you're only throwing the ball to him 2 or 3 times a game, why do you have him? If you've got Marvin Harrison and you're only throwing the ball to him 8 or 9 times a game, why do you have him? Especially in a game like this, you have to find out where you have the best odds of winning. And I would expect some double coverage, of course, in terms of how they're going to handle Marvin Harrison. But when there's one guy, then check to that guy. Like when there's only one guy covering Marvin Harrison, if you don't check to Marvin Harrison, that's I think you need to reevaluate what you're doing. And so yeah, I would agree with you. The corners, this was not their best game, and maybe that'll change later on in the season. We shall see. Let's see, a couple of other things that I have here. The wheel route to Kenny McIntosh. Yes, Kenny McIntosh. Because we talked about him last week, looking like Curtis Samuel, like in the passing game. There is one where it's just, I think, a run fake and then, play action to him. And then he goes on a wheel route and it gets covered. But keep an eye on that one if you're an Ohio State fan when they play Georgia. This is the second time we've seen the underhand shovel pass to Brock Bowers, neither of which have been completed. I don't know, maybe this goes for 70 yards later in the season. I hate the shovel pass, and I especially hate the underhand shovel pass.
Sir, I know Shelley Meyer. You are no Shelley Meyer. Yes, no Shelley shovel for Georgia. It's that's one of those things that if it works, you look like a genius. But it feels like you have to really have the opposing team scouted well to know that it's going to work, because otherwise you're just kind of shot putting a ball into a whole lot of traffic, and there's a lot of bodies there. And when he did that, I thought, oh Lord, that's going to get picked off, and they didn't. But there were people there that it could have. So I just pulled up the drive chart just to look at it, and Georgia's first 5 drives of the game: 3 plays, -9 yards, punt; 1 play, 35 yards, fumble. That was the long run by Kendall Milton where he fumbled. 3 plays, 2 yards, punt; 4 plays, 21 yards, punt; 6 plays, 17 yards, punt. But at that point, I think the score was still 3-0 Missouri. It was 10-0 Missouri. But Missouri had this chance to really kind of put the game away early and didn't do that, and just let them kind of hang around. And even after that, Georgia scored on its last 6 drives of the game, other than the one where they ran out the clock. But it's field goal, field goal, field goal, field goal, and then touchdown, touchdown. Like you can only hold back the dam for so long against a team with this much talent. Even when they're playing an off game, even when they're not necessarily, even when they look a little disinterested at times, you can only hold things off so long. Just scrolling through my list. Oh, and there were a couple times when Georgia got stuffed on short yardage. There was 3rd and 1 run inside the 5 where they got stuffed, and it was like, oh boy, that's, they ended up at the end of the game being able to run the ball in Missouri, but they did not look great running the ball, and they didn't really look great running the ball against Oregon either, which was, I guess, partly a function of Stetson Bennett being on pace for like 500 yards passing at halftime, and then not really needing to run the ball. But in the 2 games we've watched so far, Georgia has not consistently run the ball. That is something I kind of keep an eye on. I think if you can run the ball, if you have a Michigan-style rushing attack and you can actually run the ball in Ohio State, which, Ohio State really had to sort of sell out to prevent that from happening and then got passed on. That's what I think, that's the kind of offense that I think would really, really be a big problem for Ohio State if you can really consistently run the ball. Again, we'll see. We're going to watch a couple more games. They're not all going to look like this. Georgia's going to look good in a couple of the other games we have coming up, Tennessee and LSU. So I'm suspecting they're going to be able to run the ball more. If you can't run the ball against Ohio State and you can't force Ohio State to have to dedicate more resources to the run game, that means the Ohio State pass defense is probably a little bit better, and maybe things are not quite so easy throwing the ball downfield. So, again, this is very weird that we have really not watched a lot of Georgia this year because of the number one team, but we typically are working on Saturdays, and we're then watching the Michigan game and watching Ohio State's next opponent. So we just, I know what Georgia has done this year, but I haven't seen it yet, which is really kind of weird. So I hope you guys are enjoying these games these shows as much as we are, because it's like, this feels like we're doing our homework, but it's kind of interesting, and the homework is watching football, so that's kind of fun. So, but yeah, it is. I'm really interested to see where this goes for them and what they look like in some of these later games where I know they're going to have better performances against better opponents.
Yeah, and for Georgia fans, you guys don't understand, and those of you who are watching us, like when we don't see Georgia, all we get to hear about them is from ESPN, which means ESPN is telling us that they are flawless and that they have dominated everybody. And of course, once you watch the game, you see that that's not always the case. That 3rd and 1 that you mentioned led to a 4th and goal from the 2, and they went for it, and they did a little end around jet sweep for the touchdown. That was another one where Kirby Smart was like, no, we're not taking a field goal. This is a game of field goals. And he's like, no, you know what's better than a field goal? 2 field goals and an extra point, which is what a touchdown is. It's like, I can get ahead of the game by going ahead and going for the touchdown there, and they got it. I will also say, the Georgia offensive line eventually wins the game down the stretch. The Missouri defensive line got tired, got worn down by that Georgia offense. They just kept plugging, kept doing it, kept going. And you can continue to do that if the opponent is just going to kick field goals, because they're only getting so far ahead of you, and they're always within arm's reach, and there's always within reaching distance when they're kicking field goals. And eventually Georgia caught up with them. I think, again, scramble drill against these receivers, tight ends, and Stetson Bennett will be huge. And if they don't give up any of those plays, then again, I like Ohio State's chances, but it's going to be really hard to keep that stuff from happening with this secondary and that offense, basically. But we'll know more once we see it after the fact, Tom. Then we can speak factually like we have for these 2 episodes of watching Georgia football. Anything else?
Nope, just looking forward to Georgia fans who enjoyed the last one really hating this episode. That's going to be fun. These guys knew what they were talking about when they were talking about Oregon. Now, I'm not so sure about them. But don't worry, Tennessee's coming up. We'll get to the Tennessee game soon, and you will love us once again, and Ohio State fans will be back in the fetal position hiding under the covers. So as long as we're making someone happy, Tony, that's what it's really all about.
And hey, while you're here, go ahead and click that thumbs up if you're watching us on YouTube, please. Whether you like it or don't like it, learn to love it. As Ric Flair would say, now you have to like this video because everybody loves Ric Flair. So that will do it for us. As always, you can find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member, even if you're a Georgia fan, especially if you're an Ohio State fan. Also, as a YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle, you can find us there as well. So thank you all for joining us, and we will talk to you guys later.